Combining the render passes of our orb render layer together requires a certain formula. And in the Blender documentation, they've outlined this very well. I'll simply drag my browser window over here. If you simply search for cycles and passes, you'll find this image, which clearly shows the order of operations. We're going to add our direct and indirect together, and then multiply that result by the color. The same formula for diffuse, direct, and transmission. But for our situation, we just have glossy and diffuse, which will eventually see our glossy added over top of the diffuse combination. So let's implement that with the compositor. I'm going to spread this out a little more to give us some additional room. And by the way, that hotkey is box select, just like it works in the 3D view, or for that matter, any of Blender's editors. That's the B key, and then drag a box where you want it. And so to add two color sockets together, we're going to use the color mix node. And right away, we have a list of operations. The default is mix, but I want to add socket 1 and 2 together. So let's take our diffuse direct socket into socket 1, and then diffuse indirect into socket 2, and let's shift control click on that so we see the sum of those two passes, and then M to mute it on and off to toggle the result. Very cool. Then I can duplicate that node because I just need to change the operation to multiply, and we're ready to multiply our diffuse color over top of this previous sum, and then shift control click on that to see our fully combined diffuse element. For the sake of organization, I'm going to select these two nodes, and again with the Node Wrangler I can hit Shift P to create a frame node. We can give it a label, let's call it orb-diffuse, and then separate it with its own color. And we're ready to do the same thing for our glossy component. So how about I draw a box around the frame and its contained nodes, Shift D to duplicate it down, update our label, as well as the color, and simply plug in our direct and indirect into the proper slots, followed by the color. Stepping back to take a look at each individual operation, here's the addition, muting that on and off. This is the glossy direct, then with the addition of indirect, and finally managed by the glossy color pass. All we have to do now is add the glossy to the diffuse. So Shift A, let's add a fresh mix node. Change the operation to add, and we want the diffuse output in slot 1 and glossy in slot 2. Now we see the same thing as if I shift control click on the render layer node, so we see the combined image pass, and then going back to our combination, they are identical. Let's take this output and plug it into our last alpha over node up here to combine it with our other render layers. Shift control click on that. And we have a problem because if I cycle through our pass outputs, you'll notice that none of them support the alpha channel. They're all surrounded by black. And so when I plug it into this alpha over node, there is no alpha. But this is okay because we have an alpha channel from the render layers. So if we take a look at that, it's the white and black map where black is a value of 0 and white is a value of 1. So when I plug this into our factor socket, which you'll notice most of the nodes have a factor socket, it interprets the white data as revealing whatever is plugged into slot 2. And then the black data reveals what's in slot 1. So now shift control clicking on this to the viewer, we're back to a proper combination. And since we now have all of our passes recombined, we can tweak them on an individual basis however we want. So for example, with the reflections, let's say I want them stronger. Come over to this add node and let's bump up the value to 2, which will intensify as we go up. Alternatively, we can come down to the multiply node and we can dial that down, let's say by 0.5. And as we take the factor down, we're getting closer to what's in socket 1, which is the chrome ball, which means it's more reflective. All of this without having to re-render. Additionally, I can cut my reflection strength by half by simply taking the factor of the add to 0.5. Let's see what that looks like with our other elements. Or I can change the color of my orb texture. So let's make a little bit of room here and add another hue, saturation, and value node. Plug it into that diffuse color noodle and start dragging around the hue value. And we have a totally different style of orb. Maybe increase the saturation so it's a little more vibrant, make it darker, make it a little lighter. Really whatever you want to do here, and that's the power of compositing. The ability to tweak all of the individual components of my render without waiting on long render times.